Okay, so I guess I'll start. Hi everyone, my name is Michael again, and today I'll be presenting on my experience with human-centered design here with the course threads. So like I mentioned, my name is Michael, and I guess just to debrief, like 4 years ago, which was really long, I kind of came into college like with a lot of background in community service and doing a lot of publication work, so a lot of high school newspaper and yearbook. And then coming here, I decided to major in MCD with an emphasis in Neuro. And then you'll kind of see how that evolved. I also just recently got a certificate in entrepreneurship and technology, which I think many of you guys have done so as well. And these are kind of a handful of organizations that I've been involved with during my time at Cal. Most recently with Magic Cal, which is a creative consultancy group that deals with kind of like advertising and creative campaigning. And one fun fact about me is I visited over 62 coffee shops in San Francisco, and I'm hoping to do all of them before I graduate, so 2 weeks will not be studying. Okay, cool, so why design? So I've always been fascinated by systems at large and really understanding how things work. So I think that's the reason why when I came to college, I wanted to study biology, because as the human body, we're a very complex system. I wanted to understand like on a micro level, like how things work, and that really fascinated me. So that's kind of where I was very drawn in with, again, the scientific method of creating a hypothesis, doing experiment design, iterating, thinking about what solutions would work, and then ultimately testing it out. So that's kind of where like my fundamental logic came from. And again, like I mentioned before, in high school, I was very much involved with newspaper and yearbook, and that's where I kind of dabbled in graphic design. So coming into college, I was like, okay, like what's the best thing I can market myself to get into these clubs? And for me, it was a lot of like visual and graphic design. And as I was doing this, I realized I was making a lot of infographics. And as I made more and more, I realized, wow, like this actually is very important in the way I lay this information out, not just in visual hierarchy, but the way I communicate that kind of information, everything from writing to the statistics I want to show, all the way to the visuals. And that's kind of where these two fields intersected for me. And during that time, a lot of buzzwords like product design, interaction design was also really much popping everywhere on my feed, from Medium articles all the way to my friends. And that's where I decided to take a couple classes during my time in the year of 2017. So I'm going to kind of segue into the first course that I took, which was ME110. I took it with someone here in this group. Yay. It's the Intro to New Product Development with Hyun Kim, and it was previously taught with Alice Agogino, and thankfully we actually had a project connected to Alice, and it was in relation to the Center for Long-Term Cybersecurity. And basically what our project entailed was understanding what kind of vulnerable information is created when people interact with robotic technology. So more specifically with a nanny cam, which is basically this camera that moves around in your home setting. It monitors everything from children to pets, all the way to just your environment to make sure that you have a close eye on it. And the purpose of this project was to really understand what type of information we're comfortable kind of releasing when something like this autonomous robot is out in our environment, and then ultimately making suggestions of how we can ensure that security, whether it's through product design methods, all the way to educational tools for people to be aware of as we're getting into this new age of, information, I guess. Like explosion. So from this course, it really was my first exposure to design thinking, learning about ideas, human-centered design methods, all the way to the design council's design framework, as you guys are all familiar with. One thing that I really took away from this class was the importance of framing the question. I think a lot of times when we're going through the human-centered design process, it's just like, okay, what is the problem? What are the solutions? Diverge, converge, I'm pretty sure you guys have all heard of this. And then iterating on it and then testing out your product. But for me, I think what was very important was how are we framing the question and not being afraid to reframe that over and over if you don't feel like you're getting anywhere. Because at the very beginning of this project, a lot of our group members kind of assumed that we all knew what cybersecurity meant. And for me, it just meant, okay, as long as my computer doesn't get hacked. But for another person, it was like, okay, like how do I feel safe with this kind of robot in my environment, and what does trust look like? And I was like, wow, I never really thought about that. So I think just, again, having that collaboration and doing that initial research of like, what is the problem and how are we defining it was very crucial, and that's what this class really taught me. And in addition to the value of critiques and feedback, not only getting feedback from our groupmates, but also from other industry leaders like Alice and Young, and also just getting feedback from our users that we were testing this with. So ultimately, we came out with an app in addition to a refined version of the nanny cam, and this was based on our insights of like what would ensure kind of information security. So giving people the ability to see what videos were recorded on their nanny cam and what have you. So yeah, so this was kind of more an engineering kind of perspective, and then that same semester, I actually took a class in the School of Information called Info 214. It's titled Needs and Usability Assessment, taught by Steve Fadden, wonderful professor. He also works at Salesforce, so he was able to kind of bring in that industry knowledge. This class was very much focused on what types of user research tools are out there in the world and how you can best employ them to create, I guess, a very like human/user-centered product. So here we learned everything from journey mapping all the way to personas, user stories, how to conduct interviews, what does contextual inquiries look like, and how to distill insights and really apply that to the design team and give them what they need. So from here, what I really learned was like assumptions was a very big thing. I never really thought about this, but when you're going into a problem, you're going to make a lot of assumptions, and I think it's really important to clearly lay that out. Like for instance, like, I'm going to design, let's say, a color-coded map for, let's say, like a feature on an iPhone. But some things that I might already assume right off the bat is, okay, well, I'm assuming that the people who are looking at this product can see color, and then from there, the assumption is that people are not colorblind. But when you make these assumptions, I think that really limits who you're designing for, and it sometimes might be better to kind of, you know, think outside and say, okay, who else can I potentially design for and make this more inclusive. So I think this class really taught me a lot about how to, I guess, intuitively or explicitly say that. And then the next thing was actions are greater than words. So I'm pretty sure you guys are all familiar with this, which is sometimes when you're interviewing and you want to kind of understand what the root of the problem is or what a user's needs are, they'll say one thing, but then their actions speak another. So when we were doing a lot of usability testing, we would just have them, like for instance, walk through how they use Pinterest so we can better their experience. And from there, a lot of their actions had a lot of dissonance between what they actually said during the primary interview. So that was really interesting. So yeah, so those were kind of like my 2 official courses in human-centered design. And from there I was like, wow, like this is super cool. I want to go into product design. So then I applied for an internship at a startup called Mercari, which is an e-commerce platform where people can buy and sell any kind of used items. And from there, I was actually just interning as a UI UX designer, and I did everything from their company webpage redesigns to marketing banners, all the way to different features like chat intervention, safe search, follower recommendations. And what I really learned from this one, especially because it was a startup environment, was that we're on a very tight schedule where if there's a feature that needs to be made, you have to do it in a week. And I think it's crazy to kind of see that entire design process being squished into the timeline of like 4 days. So you don't really have the time or resources to like go into the whole like user research and like let's like do persona making, but just kind of like rapid. And what I think the interesting part about working at a startup was that I realized that the delivery of the message is sometimes equally, if not more important than the message itself. And what I mean by that is when I would have a feature design that I would like to implement into the app and I would have to pitch it to my design lead or to the stakeholders, sometimes I would have to show them the very bare minimum, even though I want to show them like a very beautiful mock-up. And I think that's sometimes misleading because when you're kind of pitching that idea, some of the stakeholders might start nitpicking at the very little details, but I don't want them to necessarily critique that. I want them to critique like the functionality of how things work. So yeah, that was kind of like my biggest takeaway. And then for my 3rd course, which was the fall of 2017, I took IOR 186, which is a product management class. And from this one, we actually started off with a product which was called Sensor Wake, which is an alarm clock. And it essentially wakes you up by emanating a scent of your choice. If you want to wake up to the scent of croissants, then it will wake you up. But what we realized is during our user research, people actually did not find a real need for it because why have that when you can just have your phone? So at that point, the thing that really drove it to us was that like we weren't solving a real problem, nor were we addressing a real need for real users. So we thought, okay, like how do we do this when we only have 2 weeks left and we have to present a final deliverable? So we were all kind of stressed out, and this was kind of during midterm season, so we were like, okay, let's all go to the gym and just work it out, you know, like physically work it out. And then we thought, oh my goodness, like why don't we meal prep? So then, because we just saw a lot of, you know, buff people kind of working out, so then we decided to do a meal prepping app. It's not very original, it's very much like kind of the Uber for meal prepping, but what we thought was interesting with this was that our value proposition would entail delivering these food, like week-long food meal preps to your local gym. So not only is it efficient and not only does it kind of curtail the cost of the delivery, but it also allows it to be like an accountability measure for you to reach your fitness goals. So every week you would go to the gym to pick up your meals, and if you don't, you're kind of starving. So that's kind of like the biggest takeaway was that you really need to solve a real problem or address a real need for real users. And the other thing that was very interesting about this course was really understanding the business aspect of product design and product management, specifically ecosystem design. So when I kind of came into this class, I thought, okay, I'm just gonna be like the product designer and like work on the UI and UX components. But I think some things that I neglected to think about was, okay, what about the cooks that will be cooking the actual food? How will delivery look like? Or how will the infrastructure for the food delivery look like in the gym? Will there be an actual chamber? Will there be a person working the shift? How would that kind of service design play? So I think thinking about that whole entire ecosystem was something very interesting about this course that I never really thought about. So it was really cool to be able to work in a very interdisciplinary team. So yeah, so that was kind of like my takeaway. So in terms of like next steps, I'll actually be designing at an agency starting in June. And then ultimately, like, this is kind of like my user journey. I don't think it's gonna pan out this way, but ultimately I decided to like go in-house to like a tech company. And then I'm kind of very interested in industrial design. So industrial design. And the reason why I want to go into industrial design from more digital to more physical is because I'm realizing now we see a shift in more zero interface, which is kind of like Google Home and a lot of like voice tech and a lot of like touch and gestures and vibrations. And I think that could really solve a lot of the big problems that I mentioned in the assumptions, which was like people who are blind or people who are deaf. And this is where I want to tap into, which is the field of accessibility and universal design. So that's kind of where I'm headed into, and ultimately I would like to build a coffee shop before I retire because I want to get into service design, and I think that's like the biggest thing I can do. Like I will not only work on spatial design, but branding, product design, so it's just like the whole gamut of design, and then like retire, hopefully, yeah. So that is my plan, thank you.